Here we go. Okay. So what we're going to look at tonight is Choiceless Awareness by Krishnamurti. I strongly and highly recommend this book. So anyway, here we go. Tonight, what we're looking at, if you've got the book, it's page 113. We're looking at fear. Okay, so we'll start. And this is Krishnamurti speaking. Do please listen to this. It is not complicated. It demands attention, and attention has its own discipline. You don't have to introduce a system of discipline. You know, sirs, what this world needs is not politicians or more engineers, but free human beings. Engineers and scientists may be necessary, but it seems to me that what the world needs is human beings who are free, who are creative, who have no fear. And most of us are ridden with fear. If you can go profoundly into fear and really understand it, you will come out with innocency so that your mind is clear. That is what we need. And that is why it is very important to understand how to look at a fact, how to look at your fear. That is the whole problem. Not how to get rid of fear, not how to be courageous, not what to do about fear, but to be fully with the fact. Sirs, you want to be fully, totally with the wave of pleasure, don't you? And you are. When you are in the moment of pleasure, there is no condemnation, no justification, no denial. There is no factor of time at the moment of experiencing pleasure. Physically, sensually, your whole being vibrates with it. Isn't that so? When you are in the moment of experiencing, there is no time, is there? When you are intensely angry, or when you are full of lust, there is no time, psychological time, you mean. Time comes in, thought comes in, only after the moment of experiencing. And then you say, by Jove, how nice, or how terrible. If it was nice, you want more of it. If it was terrible, fearful, you want to avoid it. Therefore, you begin to complain, to justify, to condemn. And these are the factors of time which prevent you from looking at the fact. Now, have you ever faced fear? Please listen to the question carefully. Have you ever looked at fear? Or in the moment of being aware of fear, are you already in a state of flight from the fact? I will go into it a little bit and you will see what I mean. We name, we give a term to our various feelings, don't we? In saying, I am angry, we have given a term, a name, a label to a particular feeling. Now, please watch your own minds very clearly. When you have a feeling, you name that feeling. You call it anger, lust, love, pleasure, don't you? And this naming of the feeling is a process of intellectualization which prevents you from looking at the fact. That is, at the feeling. You know, when you see a bird and say to yourself, that is a parrot or a pigeon or a crow, you are not looking at the bird. You have already ceased to look at the fact because the word parrot or pigeon or crow has come between you and the fact. This is not some difficult intellectual feat, but a process of the mind that must be understood. If you would go into the problem of fear, or the problem of authority, or the problem of pleasure, or the problem of love, you must see that naming, giving a label, prevents you from looking at the fact. Do you understand? You see a flower and you call it a rose. And the moment you have given it a name, your mind is distracted. You are not giving your full attention to the flower. So naming, terming, verbalizing, symbolizing prevents total attention toward the fact. Right, sirs? Shall we go on? All right. We are continuing what we're talking about at the beginning. We are still asking ourselves if it is possible to be choicelessly aware of a fact, and the fact is fear. Now, can the mind, which is addicted to symbols and whose very nature it is to verbalize, stop verbalizing and look at the fact? Don't say, how am I to do it? But put the question to yourself. I have a feeling, and I call it fear. By giving it a name, I have related it to the past, to memory. So memory, the word, the symbol, is preventing me from looking at the fact. Now, can the mind, which in its very thought process verbalizes, gives names, look at the fact without naming it? Do you understand? Sirs, you have to find this out for yourselves. I cannot tell you. If I tell you and you do it, you will be following and you won't be free of fear. What matters is that you should be totally free of fear and not be half-dead human beings, corrupt, miserable people who are everlastingly afraid of their own shadow. To understand this problem of fear, you have to go into it most profoundly, because fear is not merely on the surface of the mind. Fear is not just being afraid of your neighbor or of losing a job. It is much deeper than that. And to understand it requires deep penetration. To penetrate deeply, you need a very sharp mind. And the mind is not made sharp by mere argumentation or avoidance. One has to go into the problem step by step. And that is why it is very important to comprehend this whole process of naming. When you name a whole group of people by calling them Muslims or what you will, you have got rid of them. You don't have to look at them as individuals. So the name, the word, has prevented you from being a human being in relationship with other human beings. In the same way, when you name a feeling, you are not looking at the feeling. You are not totally with the fact. You see, sirs, where there is fear, there is no love. Where there is fear, do what you will. Go to all the temples in the world. Follow all the gurus. Repeat the Gita every day. You will never find reality. You will never be happy. You will remain immature human beings. The problem is to comprehend fear, not how to get rid of fear. If you merely want to get rid of fear, then take a pill which will tranquilize you and go to sleep. There are innumerable forms of escape from fear. But if you escape, run away, fear will follow you everlastingly. To be fundamentally free of fear, you must understand this process of naming and realize that the word is never the thing. The mind must be capable of separating the word from the feeling and must not let the word interfere with direct perception of the feeling, which is the fact. When you have gone so far, penetrated so deeply, you will discover there is buried in the unconscious, in the obscure recesses of the mind, a sense of complete loneliness, of isolation, which is the fundamental cause of fear. And again, if you avoid it, if you escape from it, saying it's just too fearful, if you do not go into it without giving it a name, you will never go beyond it. The mind has to come face to face with the fact of complete inward loneliness and not allow itself to do anything about the fact. That extraordinary thing called loneliness is the very essence of the self, the me, with all its chicaneries, its cunningness, its substitutions, its web of words in which the mind is caught. Only when the mind is capable of going beyond that ultimate loneliness is there freedom, the absolute freedom from fear. And only then will you find out for yourself what is reality. That immeasurable energy, which has no beginning and no end. As long as the mind spawns its own fears in terms of time, it is incapable of understanding that which is timeless.
Could you read the point about the further recessing, the loneliness?
When you have gone so far, penetrated so deeply, you will discover there is buried in the unconscious, in the obscure recesses of the mind, a sense of complete loneliness, of isolation, which is the fundamental cause of fear. But then he goes on, that extraordinary thing called loneliness is the very essence of the self, the me, with all its chicaneries, its cunningness, its substitutions, its web of words in which the mind is caught.
Could you explain a little bit more about that? What you just read, the mind has to come face to face with the fact of a complete inward loneliness and not allow the self to do anything about it. The
Right.
extraordinary thing called loneliness is the very essence of self, the me.
Right.
So is it because this is something that we create, this me, and in creating it, we create the loneliness?
The me is the loneliness, the belief in a me
But initially,
as a permanent entity is the loneliness, is the fear.
I don't get that, because when you're born, you're not born with fear.
But you're
learn
also,
fear.
there's no me.
But you learn you learn fear.
No, well, there's
I mean, psychological fear.
physical, well, psychological fear is associated with the me. There might be physical reaction of fear if you're crossing the street and suddenly there's a bus
Right.
and you jump out of the way. He's not talking about that.
Right.
He's
I'm not
talking
talking about that either.
psychological fear,
Right.
which is the me. No me, no fear.
Right.
Well, easy said than done.
Well, but this is interesting.
Yeah,
'Cause
no, absolutely.
He didn't say do anything about it, right? He said have choiceless awareness and stay with it so that there's a direct perception without the thoughts and the words and the me coming in. Just the seeing, remember? He always says the seeing is the doing. If there is a sense and there's an awareness of fear, and we know what that is, you feel it in the body first, usually, in the body, in the pit of your stomach, and there's an awareness of it, and immediately we label it fear. But
it's not the we, it's the I that's doing that.
Well, of course, yes.
That's what I'm getting at. So the fear is in the I, it's in the creation of the I. And whenever you verbalize, you're using the I, and that's when you got a problem, because you're engaged. You're engaging the reality of now with the past. You see,
That's right.
The past.
That's right. Because the me is based on thought, and thought is always of the past. Psychological thinking is of the past.
It seems that loneliness really is duality, right? I mean, is when you start feeling there's self and other. That's when this learned habit of loneliness comes in.
Yes. Of course.
We are by nature alone because, we have our own thoughts and stuff like that, but we are never lonely.
Right. There's a difference between liking to be alone at times and being lonely.
Could you read the line about loneliness?
The one I just read?
Yeah, he seems to be saying that when you face the fear and you go to the deepest recesses of the mind.
Yeah, only when your mind is capable of going beyond the ultimate loneliness is there freedom.
Well,
absolute freedom from fear.
So let's read again to what he said. When you have gone so far, penetrated so deeply, right?
I'm penetrating deeply into seeing there's no me.
No. What about the fear? Without naming it, there's an awareness of a feeling. And usually we automatically, because we've recognized it from the past, we name it fear, right?
Well, there's a no naming of it becomes, he introduces that because to me, it's implied what you don't want to do is you don't want to use the me.
Yes, you don't want to name it. That's right.
But
You want
that's
to
a
just,
function of the me.
that's right. So you want to stay with that feeling without naming it.
Hold on a second. There's no fear without a me.
Right.
Me is fear.
Okay, so if I'm, and the language is dualistic. So if I'm introspecting and looking within at my fear, it's going to bring me to the me. And then it's going to bring me to know me.
No. He's saying here, if you penetrate so deeply, fear, the feeling, you will then come upon the deeper feeling of loneliness and isolation, which is the essence of me. You see, it's like going deeper and deeper. That's what he's saying here. I'll read it again.
So he's saying
You
that.
tell me if
Hold on. So then he's saying what? Fear is nothing but disguised loneliness. All fear comes down to a sense of loneliness.
all fear comes down to loneliness, which is the me, which is, it's just another level of the me. You know what? We don't have to be until you don't need the intellect. Just stay. Look, the most important thing here is when the feeling arises, to see, are we able to not name it and just stay with it?
Hold on a second.
Go ahead, Paulie, what?
If I had that machine that you go through at the airport that scans you for metal objects and all that, right? And I said, well, I've got a new one here. And when you step through this machine, you'll have no me. You'll lose your self-identity.
No fear.
Okay. How many people are going to be ready to step through that machine and lose their self-identity? And I'm wondering if I'm standing at that machine and I'm consider that choice that I'm going to step across it, and I may not have me any longer, this image I have of myself. I don't know that loneliness would be what I would be feeling.
No. Let's say, first of all, I don't know that loneliness is the only, probably the greatest, deepest fear is the fear of death, dying, not being.
Of losing myself, yeah.
However, when we are able to stay, truly stay, give full attention to just the feeling, we can go deeper. This is according to what he's saying here. And at the deeper level, he said, in the deepest recesses of the mind, there is also this sense of loneliness, which is isolation. And isolation is the fundamental aspect of the me. It's the fundamental aspect then of fear, because it's one coin. It's one coin. The coin is this me. And on one side, you could say there's fear with loneliness. On the flip side, you could say there's a fear of ending, of dying, of losing this me. But me is the coin. And all he's saying here is get in touch with these feelings, have a direct perception of them. And it may happen that, see, let me go. If you go in with the approach, I'm going to do this, but in doing this, I'm going to lose the me. Forget about it. That's the me going into it. Nothing good can come of that, nothing productive. But if you go into it wanting nothing but to understand this feeling without naming it, just to stay with it. And I know that if you stay with it, it gets stronger initially, but then it begins to subside. And now if you're still giving full attention and not naming it, usually what happens, it goes away. That's not to say it doesn't come back. But that's usually what happens. He's just saying, stay with it, and get to the place where you begin to see that there's a loneliness and a sense of isolation.
Is he distinguishing between fear and suffering?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, isn't fear suffering? Isn't loneliness suffering? Isn't isolation suffering? All this is.
We suffer when we become dualistic, when we separate self and other. That's when we suffer. That's the sort of bottom line for suffering.
That's
I
right.
I would argue that's the bottom line also for fear is the same thing. So maybe he's, in a sense, equating these two terms right now.
Yes, and that very well may be, but it is. We know for ourselves.
But fear is really, it's a feeling, right?
Yes, that's right.
Whereas
That's
suffering is more, I don't know if that's a feeling or if it's just
yes.
something just ain't right, you know?
Well, when you talk about psychological suffering, we're not now talking about physical suffering.
Right.
We're talking about psychological suffering.
Right.
With psychological suffering, is that independent of the me?
It is the me.
That's right.
Right.
But the me is created. But this is the thing that hangs me up. I wasn't born with a me. When I popped out of the womb, I had a couple. I had my consciousness was empty. I had this basket that all my experiences now are going to be deposited. And at some point, I'm taught to separate, like Billy is saying. I'm taught to separate between the observer and the observed.
Right.
And so that starts the whole structure of creating the me. But there's another aspect of it. And the other aspect of it is that this creation is being done in an environment which conditions it.
Yes.
Yes.
That's right.
And it's that combination of accumulating memory, and then we learn how to use that memory. In other words, we're taught how to interpret thoughts as they come up, that eventually says there's a you go, or this or that or the other thing. So that's the thing. So it seems to me that if you can pause, I don't know, you can't get rid of the I. I don't think I can get rid of my I. I can pause it and I can be choicelessly aware of it.
Right.
But it seems to me that the crux here, thank you, JK, but I guess I'm being argumentative here a little bit. You know, that once you understand the role that the me plays, then when you dig down and you realize all of your feelings are a product of the I. There is no feelings when the I is not present. And what he's pointing at in a backhanded way is that when you pause the I and there is no I, then you get rid of all these things. You get rid of fear, you get rid of all of your problems. There is no suffering. But the problem is that at the best I can do it maybe in microseconds, in small bits of time, because then I go back to using language, and the minute I'm into language, I'm into my me, my I, and I'm not seeing reality. And in certain instances, that can cause suffering, psychological suffering.
Yes.
Hey, Ugo, you're saying you weren't born with a me, right?
Right. I
Okay,
believe
so
that.
let's instead of using the word me, how about we use this phrase separate self? Okay. So this idea of a separate self, okay, at some point very early on, you have a notion of yourself as a separate self. There's you and there's other. Would you agree with that?
I'd have to give that some thought.
Okay. So you can give that some thought, but just let me carry on just for this was kind of quick. If there is you and other, right? Then that into that enters this idea that you can be hurt by other. Right? A tiger, a fast speeding car, disease, microbes, this kind of stuff, right? So it's this notion of separate self, whether you call it a me or something else, is the separate self is the problem.
Yes.
And actually that notion of us as a separate self enters, I think it's either there at birth or it's there very shortly thereafter. If you look, well, I just check it out. Look at little kids or look at, newborns or whatever, and I think you'll see that there's a notion of a separate self.
Yeah. It begins at about age 3.
Yeah, because
Okay.
the memories that I have of little kids, I'm not talking about I'm talking about months, maybe 8, 9 months, a year and a half or whatever. They're right there with whatever is happening.
Yeah, I'm not
There's
talking
no sense of self.
Well, but I'm not talking about I'm talking about a notion of a separate self, not egoic self. It's a little bit different. But
I don't understand that one because I just don't think that at that early age there is any sense of separateness or of self.
There isn't.
The child is just completely embraced with his senses that he's learning how to experience, and the experiences of the senses, which are transformed into memory, and around mama and papa teaches them how to interpret those feelings and so on and so forth.
Okay, but let's follow along. So Chip, what point do you want to make about the separate self?
There is no separate self. That's the illusion, right? Non-duality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not two. There's right non-duality. There is no separate self.
Absolutely.
That's and the notion of a separate self, we can talk about where it actually enters, but I think you'll see, or my observation is it's a relatively pervasive experience, and I think it starts pretty soon on, the notion of a separate self. But and that's where the fear is, because the fear comes from injury to the separate self, or harm to the separate self, or isolation to the separate self. It's a cascading set of effects from the notion of separate self. So that's the point I'm trying to make.
Well, that's a pretty sophisticated notion, a notion of a separate self. And I think that arises because the infant or the child, whatever it is, hasn't read a book, or no one has told them about, being the what you really are, that your awareness, you're a present awareness. I don't think that notion really exists in a very small child. And that notion of not being what you think you are, but not being your thoughts, not being your me, your created me. I think that takes a little bit of sophistication. I guess Krishnamurti as a child had it, and there are other folks in this world that have had it, but they are very few and far between, I would think.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the concept, Ugo. I'm not talking about entertaining the concept of a separate self. I'm talking about experiencing our beingness as a separate self or non-dual. If we experience ourselves as non-dual, there is no fear, because there is no other.
Right.
Well, up to a certain age, that little
It doesn't
child
forget
is
the age thing.
himself
Forget the age
non-dual.
thing, Ugo. Just actually think about the actual experience of the individual. I think there are people that experience themselves as non-dual, and I think in them there is no fear.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that separate self or the non-dual.
Mhm.
Anyway, just a thought to
That's
share.
interesting. No. This is,
I'm wondering also if you're in that state of non-dual, if your fear of death isn't also removed.
Yes. Yes.
Totally.
Not just the fear of
Totally.
isolation or the fear of hurt or whatever. It's just also-
Totally.
Well,
Absolutely.
then
you're in the moment. There's no birth, there's no death when you're completely in.
well, there would be no more identification with the body.
Absolutely.
Right.
So then there's no, how could there be fear of death?
well, there's at some point an acceptance of that what you basically are is present awareness, or whatever you want to call it, the God or whatever you want to call it. And it's at that point, I think, that all the rest of this stuff goes away once you can accept what it is. Because when the me pops up and it starts to cause chicanery, whatever, at some point the choiceless awareness comes in and takes over and says, hey, that's not what you are, and gives you pause. Now I'm working towards that. But I can understand that. I understand. But it's one thing to be able to talk about the me and so on and so forth, but then to accept it. Well, if you're not the me, then what are you? And I mean, really accept what you are. And once you do that, then of course, there is a separation. That's a separation of the me from the body. And what happens to the body is not what's happening to the real self or the I, because that's timeless. It has no beginning. It has no end. It illuminates feelings and experiences, but it's not, experiences or whatever. It's just there. It's hard to describe that. But that much I can get a basic understanding of.
But the bottom line of the reading tonight really is just to experience the feeling of fear.
Yes.
Don't avoid it. The fact, you keep using the word fact, the fact.
Right. And you can substitute anything in that: fear, anger.
Well, according to J.K., you can only see a fact if you see it without the eye. If you don't process it through the eyes of the eye.
That's right.
It's the only way that you can see the whole fact, all of it.
Well, that's with choiceless awareness. That's
Right.
what choiceless awareness means.
Right. Seeing what is.
The seeing what is.
Yep.
And it's hard for us to do that because, right? Because, as he said, if it's painful, we want to run away from it. If it's pleasurable, we want to run toward it.
Well, the mind takes off and goes into a whole explanation of what's happening. It's pretty hard to shut, for me anyhow, when once I get going, once the thing gets going, to shut down the dialogue, to shut down the chatter. It wants to explain the fear. It wants to explain the suffering or the joy or whatever it is. It's not satisfied with just being. It's got to describe it. It's got to evaluate it. It's got to rate it. I like it. I don't like it. It's too hot, it's too cold, and the whole
Yes.
And you miss the point of being in that moment.
You know what? Actually, what you're talking about is habit. And I want to just, because I think this might help us. Okay. It's a short page. It's page 130. But listen what he does here. I think it's very interesting. So to understand one habit is to open the door to understanding the whole machinery of habit. So I must first understand the futility of resistance or effort in breaking a habit. If that is clear, what happens? I become aware of the habit, fully aware of it. If I smoke, I observe myself doing it. I am aware of putting my hand in my pocket, bringing out the cigarettes, drawing one from the package, tapping it on my thumbnail or other hard surface, putting it in my mouth, lighting it, extinguishing the match, and puffing. I am aware of every movement, of every gesture, without condemnation or justifying the habit, without saying it is right or wrong, without thinking
Yeah, there it is.
how dreadful I must be free of it, and so on. I am aware without choice, step by step as I smoke. You try it next time. That is, if you want to break the habit. And in understanding and breaking one habit, however superficial, you can go into the whole enormous problem of habit. Habit of thought, habit of feeling, the habit of imitation, and the habit of hungering to be something. For this too is a habit. When you fight a habit, you give life to that habit, and then the fighting becomes another habit in which most of us are caught. We only know resistance, which has become a habit. All our thinking is habitual. But to understand one habit is to open the door to understanding the whole machinery of habit. You find out where habit is necessary, as in speech, and where habit is completely corruptive. So it's interesting because he's, when you were saying about this, it doesn't stop, it doesn't stop. So again, it's just a choiceless awareness of what's going on without any entering of the thought it shouldn't be happening, because that is the me. Any kind of condemnation, any kind of editorializing is the me. But just the seeing, I thought it was so beautiful, see every movement, just to watch, just to observe, without wanting anything, without wanting to end the habit even.
Just a second. So how is that going to help me stop smoking? I can do everything he said. Take the cigarette out, pack it on, light it and all that. One could say that that would make me enjoy the smoking experience all the more.
No, but you want to understand that it's a habit.
I understand.
And you want freedom of the habit.
But
if you don't want to be free of it, then why would you even bother?
If there's a motive to be free of it, then how is that choiceless?
But it's, no. The motive, yes, the approach is that there needs to be freedom. There needs to be freedom from all that exaggerates or reinforces this sense of me, this sense of isolation, this sense of separateness. So that's the approach. Do I say I'm going to do this because I absolutely want to end it? No. That'll never happen, because it's the me that then wants to end it. But there is a choiceless awareness about freedom. There is a choiceless awareness of the taste of that. There is a choiceless awareness of what it means to really feel peaceful, just peaceful. And that's it. I'm not attached to the outcome. The smoking may end, the smoking may not end.
I think there might be an implication here that with this breaking of a habit, I think you can't get away from somewhere the habit that you're trying to avoid is not, you've made a decision that it's not a good habit. In other words, it's like smoking. You know at some point that, well, what's wrong with having a good habit? Good habit of washing your hands when you get up in the morning, brushing your teeth, doing certain things, taking a shower. They're habitual, but you're not going to stop doing that just because it's a habit. I think there's somewhere, somehow, a judgment made that this is a bad habit. And one of the problems with the habit is that I have a hell of a time trying not to do it. And so, and I'm identifying because I did smoke when I was in my, I guess, in my 20s and up to the 40s. And what finally turned me off, it wasn't Krishnamurti. It was that one night I was out of cigarettes and it was late. It was like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And I couldn't find a cigarette in the house. And at some point, I dumped the garbage on the kitchen floor looking for a longie, one a little bit of tobacco on it. And I found one. I lit it up, and it was so bad tasting that finally did it. I said, "That's it. This is crazy." I mean, I finally got to a point where I could see that this was ridiculous. Besides the fact that I had tried to quit a number of times. I think it would have been
Okay,
easier
but-
with Krishnamurti.
No, but I think he's talking about habits in the context of accoutrements or reinforcements of a me.
Right, that's the point.
Right.
And the seeing
okay.
is
All
the doing, and the seeing is the doing. So the moment that there was a seeing that this is insanity, what I'm doing here, or what's happening here. In that moment of seeing it, it ends. And that's true for many people. Because what you said, Ugo, I've heard many times from many different people. So I don't know that we're going to be able, moment by moment, to be so attentive. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is those moments when there is an awareness of what's actually going on, of the what is of that moment. And that's priceless. That's a gift. That's grace. And that's the only thing that, according to Krishnamurti, which will create change. Transformation. He doesn't even say, no, I'm sorry. He doesn't say change is still within the old way. Transformation.
And Ugo, you may spend more time than you think in a choiceless place. I mean, you say sometimes that you're sitting and looking out the window and the birds and the sky, and everything feels clear. And then you leave the window and you go about your day, and the me comes right back. But the me only comes right back when there's a judgment. It doesn't come back just by acting and fulfilling daily chores. It's only the judgment and the commenting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's the tricky part, because you can't get rid of the me. The me takes you through a day.
No, but
living.
Ugo, you're not constantly
I know.
right. If you sit down to do a familiar task, if you're sitting down writing out your electric bill, I don't think there's probably much chattering your mind about the electric bill. It's a mindless task, so to speak.
Well, recently it's been, this is outrageous, but
Well,
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Paul,
Yeah.
which is basically if we actually documented it, like we took the facts of when is the me present? When is the me actually manifesting? That's a really interesting question. And I think, yeah, Ugo, you're thinking it's always here and it's always with you, but that might not actually be the fact of the matter. Because the me is only present if in some way or another you're thinking about the me or as the me, however you want to say it.
Right.
That's right.
And that's why these indulgences, or I'm calling them indulgences, and I don't mean that in a judgmental way, but that's why these distractions, like whatever it is, drugs, sex, alcohol, movies, music, all these things. What's the process behind them? The process is your mind is refocusing and relinquishing for however long a period of time the me, which is that liberation from the me in those moments.
And one of Krishnamurti's, I think, most important questions is, and he asks you to look, is there a me independent of thought?
Right.
That really brings it home.
Yeah.
To look and see, is there a me independent of thinking?
Right. Absolutely.
Okay, guys.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you.
Have a wonderful week. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you soon.
You guys too. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Buonasera a tutti,
Bye.
buonasera.
Just see everyone later.
Buonasera.
Buonasera.